generated 5 girls, has no value. The voices mocked through the harvest ceremony hall, their cruel laughter cutting deeper than any blade ever could. Princess Serena stood frozen as the words echoed off the stone walls, her hands trembling against the folds of her burgundy gown, while the scent of fresh-baked sweet bread and flickering lanterns created a mockery of celebration around her humiliation. The autumn equinox had always been sacred in the kingdom of Valdris, a time when the golden wheat was blessed and the year's abundance counted. But tonight, as the cold wind made the ceremonial lanterns dance with nervous shadows, Serena felt nothing but the crushing weight of disappointment that had followed her for years. 5 daughters, 5 beautiful, intelligent, loving daughters who laughed like silver bells and dreamed of adventures beyond castle walls. Yet to the court, to the sneering nobles who whispered behind jeweled fans, they represented failure incarnate. The harvest ceremony should have been a time of gratitude, of recognizing the kingdom's prosperity under her late husband's rule and her regency. Instead, it had become a public execution of her worth as a woman, as a mother, as a leader. The mocking voices belonged to courtiers she had once considered allies, their faces twisted with cruel amusement as they watched her composure crack like ice under spring sun. "Perhaps the bloodline ends with her," someone whispered loudly enough for half the hall to hear. "No sons to carry forward the legacy. What use is a princess who cannot secure succession?" Serena's nails dug into her palms, drawing tiny crescents of pain that barely registered against the ache in her chest. She had heard these words before, in quieter moments, in private conversations she was never meant to overhear. But never so publicly, never with such calculated cruelty, never during the sacred harvest ceremony when the kingdom should be united in thanksgiving. Her 5 daughters stood beside her in descending order of height, their little hands clasped together as they sensed their mother's distress. Evelyn, the eldest at 12, had the same dark auburn hair as Serena, and eyes like storm clouds that missed nothing. The twins, Isabella and Helena, stood shoulder to shoulder at 10 years old, their golden curls catching the lantern light like captured sunshine. 8-year-old Celeste bit her lower lip the way she did when trying not to cry, while little Aurelia, barely 6, pressed closer to her mother's skirts with the instinctive need for protection. They were perfect, every one of them, brilliant and kind and brave in ways that took Serena's breath away. Evelyn could recite poetry in 3 languages and played the lute like an angel. The twins had mastered the art of healing herbs under the gentle tutelage of their beloved nurse, Nana Meredith, and could stitch wounds with steady hands that never trembled. Celeste painted watercolors that captured light itself, and little Aurelia had a voice so pure that even the kitchen cats stopped to listen when she sang. But they were girls. In a world that valued only male heirs, their accomplishments meant nothing. Their very existence had become Serena's shame. "The kingdom needs strong leadership," the voice continued, belonging to Duchess Viviana, a sharp-faced woman whose own marriage had produced 3 sons and endless smugness. "Perhaps it is time to consider alternative arrangements. A regency council, perhaps. Someone more suitable." The word suitable hit like a physical blow. Serena closed her eyes briefly. Feeling the familiar burn of tears she refused to shed in public. 6 years since her husband's death from a fever that came swift and merciless. 6 years of ruling in her daughters' names, of making difficult decisions and maintaining peace with neighboring kingdoms. 6 years of proving her worth through actions, through policy, through the prosperity that surrounded them even now in this hall filled with the abundance of a successful harvest. But none of it mattered. None of it would ever matter as long as she had failed in the one duty that defined a royal woman's worth. The mockery might have continued indefinitely, each cruel word adding another stone to the wall of her humiliation. But suddenly, the great oak doors at the far end of the hall swung open with a sound like thunder. A rush of cold night air swept through the chamber, extinguishing several candles and sending the remaining lanterns swaying wildly on their chains. Every conversation died. Every laugh strangled in throats, suddenly tight with fear. He entered like darkness given form, his black cape flowing behind him like liquid shadow as it swept across the stone floor. The vampire alpha of the Northern Territories moved with predatory grace, each step deliberate and silent despite the heavy boots he wore. His presence filled the vast hall, making even the highest-ranking nobles step back instinctively, creating a path through the crowd as if by magic. Serena had heard stories of him, whispered tales that servants shared in kitchen corners and travelers spoke of in hushed tones at roadside inns. Darius of the Night Court, they called him. The Alpha, who had united the scattered vampire clans under one banner, who commanded loyalty through strength, tempered with unexpected mercy. Some said he was ancient beyond counting. Others claimed he was barely 2 centuries old, but possessed power that dwarfed vampires twice his age. All agreed on one thing: he was dangerous in ways that made wise people keep their distance. He looked younger than Serena had expected, appearing no more than 30 in human terms, though vampire age was notoriously difficult to judge. His dark hair was swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, all sharp angles and classical beauty that belonged in old paintings rather than walking among mortals. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, silver gray like storm clouds pregnant with lightning, holding depths that spoke of centuries of experience and power barely contained. The entire court held its breath as he moved through the hall, his silver gaze sweeping over the assembled nobles with the kind of assessment that weighed souls and found most of them wanting. Several ladies fainted outright, though whether from fear or the overwhelming presence of otherworldly magnetism was unclear. Even the bravest of the court's warriors seemed to shrink in their ceremonial armor, but Darius paid them no attention whatsoever. Instead, he walked directly to where Serena stood with her daughters, his cape billowing behind him like dark wings. The mockery that had filled the air moments before seemed like a distant memory, replaced by tension so thick it could be cut with a blade. When he reached them, every eye in the hall focused on what would happen next, expecting him to acknowledge the throne, to bow to tradition, to follow the protocols that had governed such meetings for generations. He did none of those things. Instead, Darius stopped before Serena's daughters and, to the absolute shock of everyone present, inclined his head in a gesture of unmistakable respect. Not the shallow nod of political necessity, but a deep, genuine acknowledgement that recognized their worth as individuals. His silver eyes met each of their young faces in turn, and Serena watched in amazement as her daughters, who had been trembling with anxiety moments before, straightened with something approaching dignity. "Your Highnesses," he said, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall despite its quiet tone. There was something in the way he spoke the title, an emphasis that made it clear he meant every syllable. Not the perfunctory address of courtly duty, but genuine recognition. Then he turned to Serena herself, and when their eyes met, she felt something shift in the very air around them. His gaze held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch, not from fear but from something else entirely, something that made her pulse quicken in ways she had almost forgotten were possible. "Princess Serena," he said, and again there was that quality in his voice that transformed mere words into something approaching reverence. "I have come to make you an offer." The hall remained frozen in perfect silence, hundreds of people afraid to breathe, lest they miss whatever would come next. Serena found her own voice caught in her throat, trapped by the weight of attention and the strange, inexplicable pull she felt toward this dangerous stranger who had transformed her moment of greatest humiliation into something else entirely. "I take you as mine," Darius announced, his words ringing through the hall like a bell tolling the hour of judgment. The effect was immediate and electric. Gasps echoed from every corner, followed by a buzz of whispered speculation that grew louder with each passing second. The nobles who had been mocking her moments before now stared in open-mouthed shock, their cruel words forgotten in the face of this impossible turn of events. But Serena barely heard them. She was lost in those silver eyes, in the weight of words she didn't understand, but that seemed to settle around her like a cloak of protection she hadn't known she needed. "I don't understand," she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible even to herself. Something that might have been a smile touched the corner of Darius's mouth, Though it was gone so quickly, she might have imagined it. "You will," he said simply. "In time, you will understand everything." He stepped closer, close enough that she could catch the scent of winter air and something else, something wild and indefinable that made her shiver in ways that had nothing to do with cold. When he spoke again, his voice was pitched for her ears alone, though she suspected his supernatural hearing meant he was aware of every whisper and heartbeat in the hall. "Your daughters are precious beyond measure," he said, and there was something in his tone that made her maternal instincts sit up and take notice. "They possess gifts that few recognize, bloodline traits that mark them as special in ways your court cannot comprehend. You have protected them well, but greater challenges lie ahead." "What do you mean?" Serena asked, her protective instincts overriding her confusion and the strange attraction she felt toward this mysterious figure. "There are things you do not yet know about your own heritage," Darius replied, his silver eyes holding secrets she couldn't begin to guess at. "Ancient pacts and older bloodlines. Your great-grandmother made promises that echo still through the generations, and your daughters bear the marks of those ancient agreements whether they know it or not." Before Serena could ask what he meant, he stepped back and addressed the hall once more, his voice carrying the unmistakable ring of authority that brooked no argument. "Let it be known throughout both the day and night courts that Princess Serena and her daughters are under my protection," he declared. "Any who would harm them in word or deed answer to me personally." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable, and Serena watched as several of the nobles who had been mocking her earlier took unconscious steps backward, their faces pale with sudden understanding of the line they had crossed. Duchess Viviana, however, was either braver or more foolish than the rest. She stepped forward, her chin raised in challenge despite the tremor in her voice. "By what right do you claim sovereignty over our royal family?" she demanded. "This is a matter for the day court, not your kind." Darius turned his attention to her with the slow, deliberate movement of a predator acknowledging a threat that was more nuisance than danger. When he spoke, his voice carried the chill of winter frost. "By right of blood, Duchess. By right of oaths sworn in your grandmother's time. By right of protection freely given and desperately needed." His eyes flicked meaningfully around the hall, taking in the faces of those who had been so eager to tear down a grieving widow and her innocent children. "Unless you would prefer to contest my claim directly?" The challenge hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Viviana's face went white as fresh snow, and she took several hasty steps backward, clearly recognizing that she had ventured into waters far deeper and more dangerous than she had realized. I meant no disrespect," she stammered, her earlier boldness evaporating like morning mist. "Of course you didn't," Darius replied smoothly, though his tone suggested he believed nothing of the sort. "I'm sure your words were simply poorly chosen." He turned back to Serena, and when he looked at her this time, there was something almost gentle in his expression, despite the power that radiated from him like heat from a forge. "The harvest moon rises tomorrow night," he said. "I would be honored if you and your daughters would join me for dinner at Shadowmere Castle. We have much to discuss, and I believe you will find the conversation illuminating." It wasn't really a request, though he phrased it as one. Serena found herself nodding before she had consciously decided to accept, drawn by the promise of answers to questions she hadn't even known she should ask. "We will come," she heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt. Darius inclined his head once more, this time to her alone, and something in the gesture made her feel as if she had just agreed to far more than a simple dinner invitation. "Until tomorrow, then," he said, and without another word, he turned and walked from the hall with the same fluid grace with which he had entered. The moment the doors closed behind him, the hall erupted in a chaos of whispered speculation and shocked exclamations. But Serena barely heard any of it, She was too busy trying to process what had just happened, too busy feeling the lingering effects of those silver eyes and the strange sense that her life had just taken a turn towards something she couldn't yet comprehend. Her daughters pressed closer to her, their small hands seeking the comfort of her touch, and she gathered them against her like a mother bird protecting her chicks. Whatever was coming, whatever ancient pacts and bloodline gifts Darius had hinted at, She would face it as she had faced everything else in her life, with her children's welfare as her first and only priority. But as she looked around at the faces of the nobles who had been so quick to mock her, who now watched her with expressions ranging from fear to envy to calculation, she couldn't help but wonder if the vampire alpha's protection might be exactly what she and her daughters needed. The harvest ceremony continued around them, but Serena felt as if she were standing in the eye of a storm, suspended in a moment of perfect stillness before everything she thought she knew about her world would be swept away and rebuilt from the ground up. Tomorrow night, she would have answers. But tonight, for the first time in 6 years, she went to sleep without the crushing weight of worthlessness pressing down on her chest. Tonight, someone had looked at her daughters and seen not disappointments, but treasures. And perhaps, just perhaps, that would make all the difference. The carriage wheels crunched over frost-covered cobblestones as they approached Shadowmere Castle, each turn of the wheels bringing them deeper into territory that felt fundamentally different from the sunlit realms Serena had always known. The autumn air carried scents she couldn't identify, wild and ancient, while shadows seemed to move independently of their sources in ways that made her daughters press closer together on the velvet seats. Evelyn sat with her hands folded in her lap, her storm-gray eyes alert as she watched the landscape change around them. The twins, Isabella and Helena, whispered to each other in the secret language they had developed as children, their golden heads bent together conspiratorially. Celeste clutched her small leather journal, the one where she sketched the flowers and birds that caught her fancy, while little Aurelia hummed softly under her breath, a melody that seemed to calm even their nervous coachman. "Mama," Evelyn said quietly, her voice carefully controlled in the way that meant she was trying very hard not to show fear. "Are you certain this is wise?" Serena reached across the carriage to take her eldest daughter's hand, finding it cold despite the thick woolen gloves she wore. "I don't know," she admitted, because she had always tried to be honest with her children about the uncertainties of their world. "But I think we need answers more than we need safety right now." The truth was that she hadn't slept well since the harvest ceremony 3 nights ago. Every time she closed her eyes, she found herself reliving those moments when Darius had looked at her daughters with such profound respect, when he had spoken of ancient pacts and bloodline gifts as if he knew secrets about her own family that she had never suspected. The court's mockery still stung, but it had been overshadowed by a burning curiosity that wouldn't let her rest. Nana Meredith had been beside herself with worry when Serena announced their intention to accept the vampire's invitation. The elderly woman who had nursed Serena through childhood and helped raise her daughters had spent the better part of 2 days trying to dissuade her from what she called foolish curiosity that will get you all killed. But in the end, even Meredith had to admit that the alternative, remaining at court while whispers of illegitimacy and unsuitability grew louder by the day, might be more dangerous than venturing into vampire territory. "Here," Meredith had said as they prepared to leave, pressing a small cloth pouch into Serena's hand. "My grandmother's protection charm, herbs and blessed silver. It won't stop a vampire if he truly means harm, but it will prevent mind tricks and false enchantments. Keep it close." Now, as Shadowmere Castle loomed before them like something from a Gothic nightmare, Serena touched the small pouch tucked into her bodice and sent a silent prayer of gratitude to the practical old woman who had been more mother to her than her own had ever managed. The castle was larger than she had expected, its dark stone towers reaching toward a sky painted in shades of deep purple and gold by the setting sun. Gargoyles perched at the corners of the battlements, their stone eyes seeming to follow their approach, while ancient ivy climbed the walls in patterns that looked almost deliberate, as if the very plants had been trained to create living tapestries across the facade. But there was beauty here too, she realized with surprise. Gardens that should have been dormant in the autumn cold instead bloomed with night-flowering plants she didn't recognize, their white and silver petals glowing faintly in the twilight. Lanterns hung from iron posts along the approach, not the harsh brightness of oil flames, but something softer, more ethereal, that cast dancing shadows without creating the harsh contrasts she would have expected. "It's not what I thought it would be," Helena whispered, expressing what they were all thinking. "What did you expect?" Isabella asked her twin, Something scarier, more evil. Serena understood what her daughter meant. The stories told about vampire strongholds painted them as places of darkness and menace, all blood-stained stones and screaming winds. This felt different, ancient, certainly, and touched by otherworldly power, but not malevolent. If anything, there was a sense of melancholy about the place, as if it had been waiting centuries for something it had almost given up hope of finding. The carriage came to a stop before the main entrance, where torches flickered in iron brackets and massive oak doors stood open in welcome. A figure emerged from the shadows, not Darius, but another vampire, this one with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed genuinely pleased to see them. "Your Highness," he said, offering a bow that managed to be respectful without being subservient. "I am Marcus, Lord Darius's seneschal. He waits for you in the Great Hall. But please, allow me to show you to your chambers first, so that you might refresh yourselves after your journey." Serena hesitated for a moment, acutely aware that stepping across the threshold would place them completely within vampire territory, subject to laws and customs she didn't understand. But Aurelia tugged at her skirts, and when she looked down, her youngest daughter's eyes were bright with curiosity rather than fear. "The singing, Mama," Aurelia whispered. "Can you hear it? The stones are singing." Before Serena could ask what she meant, Marcus smiled with what appeared to be genuine delight. "Ah, the little one has the gift. How wonderful. Yes, child, the castle does sing for those who have ears to hear it. Your ancestor built music into the very foundations when she helped design the family wing." "My ancestor?" Serena's voice was sharp with surprise. Marcus paused, clearly realizing he had revealed more than intended. "Perhaps that is a conversation better had with Lord Darius, but yes, Your Highness, your bloodline is not unknown here. Indeed, it is held in the highest regard." He gestured toward the open doors, and after a moment's hesitation, Serena gathered her skirts and stepped across the threshold, her daughters following close behind. The moment her feet touched the polished stone floor of the entrance hall, she felt something shift in the air around them, a subtle recognition that spoke of old magic and older welcomes. The interior of the castle was a revelation. Where she had expected dark passages and oppressive atmosphere, she found soaring ceilings painted with murals that seemed to move in the flickering torchlight, depicting scenes of forests and starlit skies that felt more like windows into other worlds than mere decorations. Rich tapestries hung from the walls, their colors deep and jewel-like, even in the subdued lighting, while the scent of beeswax candles and something floral she couldn't identify filled the air. "The family wing is this way," Marcus said, leading them up a staircase whose banister had been carved with intricate patterns of vines and flowers. "Lord Darius thought you might be more comfortable in rooms that were designed with human needs in mind." The chambers he showed them to were beyond anything Serena had dared hope for. A suite of interconnected rooms with windows that looked out over the night gardens, furnished with antiques that managed to be both elegant and comfortable. There were fresh flowers in crystal vases, thick rugs that would warm bare feet on cold mornings, and fireplaces already laid with wood that smelled of apple and cedar when lit. "The twins will share this room," Marcus explained, indicating a chamber with twin beds covered in quilts that looked handmade. "Young Lady Celeste here and little Lady Aurelia next door. Your Highness, your chambers are through this door, with the sitting room adjoining, so that you need never be far from your daughters." It was all so thoughtfully arranged, so clearly designed with their comfort and security in mind, that Serena felt some of her tension begin to ease. Whatever Darius wanted from them, it didn't appear to involve the kind of captivity or coercion she had half feared. "There are servants available should you need anything," Marcus continued, "though I should mention that most of our staff are nocturnal by nature. However, we do employ several human day servants who will attend you during the hours when you are most active. Lady Catherine will be your primary attendant. She has experience with children and comes highly recommended by families in the surrounding villages." "Thank you," Serena said, meaning it. "You've been very kind." Marcus inclined his head. "It is my pleasure, Your Highness. Lord Darius has instructed that you be treated as honored guests, but more than that, you are welcome here in ways that go beyond mere hospitality." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Perhaps it would be helpful to know that several members of our household are quite excited about your visit. It has been many years since children laughed in these halls. There was something wistful in his tone that made Serena look at him more closely. She was beginning to realize that the stories told about vampires in her world might be missing important truths about their nature. "How long has it been?" she asked softly. "Since Lady Catherine's grandmother lived here?" "Nearly 40 years. She was the last of the day servants to raise children within these walls, and when she passed, the laughter went with her." He smiled sadly. "We had forgotten how much we missed it until we heard young Lady Aurelia humming in the carriage." Before Serena could respond to this revelation, a soft chime echoed through the chambers, its tone so pure and clear that it seemed to resonate in her very bones. "The dinner bell," Marcus explained. "Shall I escort you to the Great Hall, or would you prefer a few more minutes to settle?" Serena looked at her daughters, who had been exploring their new surroundings with the adaptability of children. They seemed remarkably at ease, considering they were in a vampire castle surrounded by creatures most humans feared instinctively. "We're ready," she decided. The Great Hall was magnificent in a way that took her breath away. The ceiling soared high overhead, supported by columns carved to look like ancient trees whose stone branches intertwined to form a canopy of sculptured leaves. Long windows lined the walls, though they were currently covered by tapestries that depicted what appeared to be the history of the vampire clans. Their stories told in thread and dye with artistic skill that rivaled anything in her own castle. But it was the table that truly captured her attention. Rather than the massive formal dining table she had expected, a smaller round table had been set in front of the great fireplace, its surface laid with dishes that steamed invitingly in the warm light. The chairs were sized appropriately for both adults and children, and she noticed with a pang of something that might have been gratitude that child-sized cushions had been provided to ensure her daughters could sit comfortably. Darius stood as they entered, and Serena felt her breath catch in her throat just as it had 3 nights ago. In the firelight, he seemed less otherworldly than he had in the ceremonial hall, more approachable despite the obvious power that radiated from him like heat from a forge. He wore simple dark clothing rather than the formal cape and regalia he had donned for his dramatic entrance at court, and the change made him seem more like a man and less like a force of nature. "Your Highnesses," he said, and again there was that quality in his voice that made the title feel like genuine respect rather than mere courtesy. "Welcome to Shadowmere. I hope your rooms are satisfactory?" "They're beautiful," Evelyn said before Serena could respond, her natural politeness overcoming her nervousness. "Thank you for your hospitality." Darius smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face, making him look younger and far less intimidating. "The pleasure is mine, Lady Evelyn. It has been too long since these halls heard young voices." He moved to help seat them at the table, and Serena noticed that he was careful to place himself where all the children could see him clearly, never positioning himself in a way that might seem threatening or overwhelming. When little Aurelia shyly offered him the small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked during their journey, he accepted it with the kind of solemn ceremony usually reserved for state gifts. "These are lovely," he said seriously. "Autumn violets and star moss. They will look perfect in the arrangement Lady Catherine is preparing for the morning room." The fact that he could identify wildflowers picked by a 6-year-old seemed to surprise even Evelyn, who had been watching him with the careful attention she usually reserved for new tutors. The meal that followed was a revelation in itself. Rather than the exotic or intimidating fare she might have expected, the dishes were comfort food elevated to an art form. Roasted chicken with herbs that filled the air with mouth-watering scent, vegetables that had been prepared with obvious care, bread that was still warm from the oven and accompanied by butter that had been churned that very day. "Do you not eat?" Celeste asked with the directness of childhood, apparently having noticed that while Darius served them and made conversation, his own plate remained largely untouched. "I do," he replied without any sign of offense at the personal question. "But my dietary needs are quite different from yours. I find great pleasure in watching others enjoy good food, however. It reminds me of happier times. Were you a human once?" This question came from Isabella, who had been studying him with the intense focus she usually reserved for her healing studies. "A very long time ago," Darius admitted. "So long that I sometimes struggle to remember what it felt like to taste bread or feel the warmth of sunshine on my skin." There was such genuine sadness in his voice that Serena felt her heart clench unexpectedly. She had never considered that immortality might come with losses as well as gains, that there might be a price paid in human experiences given up forever. "But surely there are compensations," she said gently. "Strength, longevity, freedom from many of the frailties that plague mortals." "Indeed," he agreed, but something in his expression suggested the trade-off wasn't as simple as she implied. "Though I have found that the greatest gifts often come with the greatest responsibilities." As the meal progressed, Serena found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't expected. Darius proved to be an excellent conversationalist, asking thoughtful questions about her daughter's interests and education while sharing stories of the castle's history that fascinated them all. He spoke of the gardens where night-blooming plants had been cultivated for centuries, of the library that contained texts in languages most humans had forgotten, of the observatory tower where the movements of stars had been tracked since before the founding of her own kingdom. But it was the small gestures that impressed her most. The way he remembered to offer Celeste paper and charcoal when she mentioned wanting to sketch the murals. How he noticed Aurelia's tendency to hum under her breath and asked if she would like to see the music room after dinner. The careful attention he paid to Helena's questions about the healing properties of the night garden plants, and his obvious respect for Evelyn's quick intelligence when she began asking detailed questions about vampire governance and customs. "You mentioned ancient pacts," Serena said finally, when her daughters had been distracted by the arrival of a dessert that looked almost too beautiful to eat. "And bloodline gifts. I think it's time you explained what you meant." Darius set down his wine glass and regarded her steadily. In the firelight, his silver eyes seemed to hold depths that spoke of centuries of secrets and carefully guarded knowledge. "Your great-great-grandmother, Princess Lyrelai, was not merely a human royal," he began, his voice taking on the cadence of someone recounting a well-known but still significant history. "She was what we call a guardian of the dawn, a human born with the rare ability to channel the gentler aspects of daylight, to create safe spaces where day and night creatures could coexist without conflict." Serena felt something cold settle in her stomach. "That's impossible. There are no records of such abilities in our family history." "Because the knowledge was deliberately obscured," Darius replied. "Your great-great-grandmother fell in love with one of my predecessors, a vampire lord named Aldrich who ruled these territories with wisdom and compassion. Their union was controversial in both courts, but it brought about an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity." He gestured toward one of the tapestries on the wall, and for the first time, Serena noticed that one of the figures depicted there bore a striking resemblance to her own features. Lyrelai worked with Aldrich to establish treaties that protected both human and vampire populations, Darius continued. She designed portions of this very castle to be comfortable for human guests, and in return, our people provided protection for her kingdom during times of war and famine. The pact they made was sealed with magic that would pass down through her bloodline, manifesting in her descendants when the need was greatest. "And you believe my daughters carry this bloodline magic?" Serena's voice was carefully controlled, though her heart was racing. "I don't believe it," Darius said quietly. "I know it. The markings on their wrists, so faint that most would dismiss them as birthmarks, are the traditional signs of Dawn Guardian heritage, and their effect on our people is already apparent. Marcus told me that the household staff have been calmer and more content since your arrival than they have been in decades." Serena looked at her daughters, who were still absorbed in their elaborate dessert, completely unaware that their entire world was being redefined around them. The small crescent-shaped marks Darius referenced were indeed present on each of their wrists, tiny silver crescents that she had always assumed were simply unusual birthmarks. "What does this mean for them?" she asked, her maternal instincts immediately leaping to the implications. "What kind of life would they have if what you're saying is true?" "That depends entirely on what you choose," Darius replied. "The old pacts provide protection and alliance, but they do not compel service. Your daughters could live normal human lives if that is what you desire for them. but they could also serve as bridges between our worlds, helping to heal ancient wounds and prevent future conflicts. Before Serena could respond, little Aurelia tugged at her sleeve. "Mama," she whispered, "the scary man isn't scary anymore." Darius laughed, a sound so genuine and warm that it seemed to fill the entire hall with unexpected joy. "I should hope not, little one. I much prefer being considered a friend to being thought scary." "Will you show us the music room now?" Aurelia asked, with the fearless directness of childhood. "I want to hear how the castle sings." "It would be my honor," Darius replied, rising from his chair with fluid grace. "But perhaps we should ask your mother if she thinks it's appropriate." All 5 pairs of eyes turned to Serena, waiting for her decision. She looked at her daughter's eager faces, at Darius's patient expression, at the warm and welcoming hall around them, and felt something in her chest that had been tight with fear and uncertainty for days finally begin to relax. "I think," she said carefully, "that we would very much like to hear the castle sing." As they made their way through corridors lit by the soft glow of carefully placed lanterns, Serena found herself walking beside Darius while her daughters explored their surroundings with the boundless curiosity of childhood. The music room, when they reached it, was unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls were lined with instruments from dozens of different cultures and time periods, while the ceiling had been designed with acoustic properties that would amplify and enhance any sound made within the space. But it was the great piano that dominated the center of the room that drew Aurelia like a magnet, her small hands reaching toward the keys with obvious longing. "May I?" she asked politely, and when Darius nodded, she pressed a single key with careful reverence. The note that emerged was perfect, pure and clear, but there was something else as well, an echo that seemed to come from the very stones of the castle itself, a harmonic resonance that made the single note bloom into something far more complex and beautiful. "Oh," Aurelia breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "It really does sing. Play us something," Helena encouraged. And soon, all 5 girls were gathered around the piano, their voices joining Aurelia's in a simple melody that seemed to transform into something magical in the acoustically perfect space. Serena found herself standing beside Darius, watching her daughters bloom with happiness and confidence in a way they hadn't been able to do at court, where every word and action was scrutinized for signs of inadequacy or failure. "They're remarkable," Darius said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "All of them. You've raised them well." "I've tried," Serena replied, surprised by the emotion that threatened to choke her voice. "But sometimes I wonder if I've failed them by not being what the court expected me to be." "The court," Darius said with gentle firmness, "is populated by fools who wouldn't recognize true value if it stood before them wearing a crown." He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "You are exactly what your daughters need you to be. Strong enough to protect them, wise enough to nurture their gifts, brave enough to venture into unknown territory when their welfare demands it." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely, and what she saw in his silver eyes made her breath catch. There was admiration there, and respect, and something else that she didn't dare name, but that made warmth spread through her chest like wine on a cold night. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. "Protecting us, I mean. What do you gain from it?" Darius was quiet for a long moment, watching her daughters as they experimented with harmonies that seemed to make the very air shimmer with musical possibility. "Perhaps," he said finally, "I am tired of being alone in a castle full of beautiful things that have no one to appreciate them. Perhaps I have waited 2 centuries for the sound of children's laughter to fill these halls again. Or perhaps I simply recognize something precious when I see it, and cannot bear to watch it be destroyed by those too blind to understand its value." His words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that made Serena's heart race in ways that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider in years. But before she could respond, the moment was interrupted by a commotion from the corridor outside. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his usual calm demeanor replaced by obvious agitation. "My lord," he said urgently, "forgive the interruption, but we have visitors. Duchess Viviana and several members of the Royal Council have arrived, demanding to speak with Princess Serena immediately. The music stopped abruptly as all heads turned toward the doorway. Serena felt her stomach drop as she realized that their peaceful interlude was about to be shattered by the very forces they had hoped to escape, at least temporarily. "Tell them," Darius said, his voice carrying the cold authority she had heard in the harvest hall, "that Princess Serena is under my protection and will receive visitors at her convenience, not theirs. They claim to be here on official business," Marcus replied. "Something about the legitimacy of your claim and the need to ensure the safety of the royal children." Serena closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of responsibility settle back onto her shoulders like a familiar but unwelcome cloak. She had known this confrontation would come eventually, but she had hoped for more time to understand what was happening to her family before she had to face it. "I'll speak with them," she said quietly, her decision made, but not alone. She looked at Darius, and something passed between them that felt like a compact being sealed, a partnership being born in the space between one heartbeat and the next. "Of course not," he replied, and the smile that curved his lips was sharp enough to cut glass. "I am very much looking forward to meeting your Duchess properly." As they prepared to face whatever storm was about to break over them, Serena couldn't help but think that everything was about to change again. And this time, she wasn't entirely certain whether that change would be for better or worse. The confrontation took place in the castle's formal receiving chamber, a room designed for exactly this type of diplomatic encounter. Tapestries depicting centuries of peaceful negotiations lined the walls, while carefully placed candles provided warm light that was neither too harsh nor too dim. Serena had chosen to wear her most formal gown, a deep midnight blue that emphasized her royal status, while the silver embroidery at the neckline caught the light in ways that seemed almost ethereal. Duchess Viviana entered with 3 council members trailing behind her like hunting hounds, eager for blood. Her sharp features were set in lines of righteous indignation, though Serena noticed the way her eyes darted nervously around the chamber, clearly uncomfortable with being in vampire territory despite her bold demands for this meeting. "Princess Serena," Viviana began without preamble, her voice carrying the tone of someone who believed themselves to be in a position of authority. "Your absence from court has caused considerable concern. There are questions about your judgment, about the influence you may be under, and most importantly, about the welfare of your daughters." Serena remained seated in the ornate chair that served as the chamber's throne, her daughters arranged beside her in smaller chairs that Darius had somehow procured in the short time since Marcus had announced their visitors. The vampire lord himself stood slightly behind and to the right of her chair, his presence both protective and clearly territorial. "My daughters appear quite well to me," Serena replied with carefully controlled calm. "Perhaps you could be more specific about these concerns." Counselor Theodore, a thin man whose ambitions had always exceeded his wisdom, stepped forward with a scroll that he unrolled with theatrical precision. "There are reports of unnatural influences, of children being exposed to creatures whose very nature poses a threat to their immortal souls. The Church has expressed particular concern about—" "The Church," Darius interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that made grown men reconsider their words, "has no jurisdiction here, nor, I believe, do any of you." Viviana's eyes flashed with anger at being interrupted. "We have every right to ensure the safety of our kingdom's royal heirs. These children represent the future of our realm, and if their mother has fallen under supernatural compulsion—" "I assure you," Serena said, rising to her feet with the fluid grace she had learned in years of court training, "that my mind is entirely my own, as is my right to determine what is best for my children." "Is it?" Viviana's smile was sharp enough to cut. "Because there are those who question whether a woman who has failed so spectacularly in her primary duty should be trusted with decisions of such magnitude." The words hit like physical blows, designed to wound and humiliate. Serena felt the familiar burn of shame start to rise in her chest. The cruel voice that had whispered in her ear for years, telling her that perhaps Viviana was right. Perhaps she had failed in ways that could never be forgiven. But before the spiral of self-doubt could take hold, something unexpected happened. Little Aurelia slipped from her chair and moved to stand directly in front of the Duchess, her 6-year-old form suddenly seeming far larger and more imposing than her small stature should have allowed. "You're mean," Aurelia said, with the devastating honesty of childhood. "Mama is the best mama in the whole world, and you're just jealous because nobody loves you the way we love her." The effect was electric. Viviana's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger, while the council members shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared to defend their position against the accusations of a child. But it was what happened next that truly changed everything. As Aurelia spoke, the silver crescent on her wrist began to glow with soft, pale light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. The glow spread outward, touching her sisters one by one until all 5 girls were surrounded by an aura of gentle radiance that filled the chamber with warmth and peace. "Impossible," Theodore whispered, his scroll forgotten as he stared at the display of power that defied everything he thought he knew about the world. "Not impossible," Darius said quietly, his silver eyes reflecting the glow from the children with something that looked remarkably like pride. "Simply rare. You are witnessing the awakening of gifts that have slept in this bloodline for 4 generations." Evelyn stepped forward to join her youngest sister, and when she spoke, her young voice carried an authority that seemed to come from somewhere far older than her 12 years. "We are not failures," she said clearly. "We are exactly what we were meant to be. And our mother is exactly the queen this kingdom needs, whether you have the wisdom to see it or not." The twins joined their sisters, their golden hair seeming to catch and reflect the otherworldly light as Helena spoke for both of them. "The gifts run in our family, but they only manifest when we're needed. When there's a bridge to be built between worlds that have forgotten how to trust each other." Celeste, usually the shyest of the 5, moved to complete the circle around their mother, her artist's eyes bright with understanding. "Mama isn't broken because she had daughters instead of sons. She's perfect because she had us, because we're the ones who can do what needs to be done." Serena felt tears slip down her cheeks as she looked at her daughters, these incredible young women who had somehow found the strength to defend not just her honor, but their own worth in the face of a world that had tried to diminish them from the moment they drew breath. "You see," Darius said, addressing the stunned delegation, "what you have interpreted as failure is actually the most profound success imaginable. Princess Serena didn't fail to produce male heirs. She produced something far more valuable. 5 daughters with the power to heal ancient wounds and unite fractured realms." Viviana recovered her composure with visible effort, though her voice shook slightly when she spoke. "Witchcraft, unnatural abilities that mark them as dangerous to the natural order. All the more reason they should be removed from such influences and placed under proper guidance." "Whose guidance?" Serena asked. And for the first time since the confrontation began, she felt the strength that had carried her through 6 years of regency flowing back into her voice. "Yours? The same council that has spent years undermining my authority and questioning my every decision? The church leaders who see evil in everything they don't understand?" She moved to stand with her daughters, and as she did, something remarkable happened. The light that surrounded them expanded to include her, and suddenly she could feel it. The power that had been sleeping in her bloodline, awakening at last in response to the love and need of her children. "I am their mother," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I am the one who held them when they were sick, who taught them to read and write and think for themselves. I am the one who has protected them from the cruelty of a world that would judge them for things beyond their control. And I will continue to do so, with or without the approval of this council. You cannot simply declare independence from the laws of the realm," Councillor Theodore sputtered, though he seemed far less confident than he had when he first entered the chamber. "Can't I?" Serena smiled, and there was something in her expression that reminded everyone present that she was not just a mother defending her children, but a queen who had ruled successfully for 6 years. "Perhaps it's time this council remembered that I am not merely a regent holding power in trust. I am the rightful ruler of this kingdom, and my daughters are my heirs, regardless of their gender." "The law of succession," Viviana began. "Can be changed," Serena interrupted smoothly. As I recall, it requires only a majority vote of the full council, not the approval of a handful of ambitious nobles who seem to have forgotten their place. The silence that followed was profound. Serena could see the calculations running behind their eyes as they realized that she was right, that they had overplayed their hand by coming here without the full backing of the council. But it was Darius who delivered the final blow to their position. "Of course," he said conversationally, as if he were discussing the weather, "there is also the matter of the ancient treaties between our realms. Treaties that specifically provide for the protection of Dawn Guardian bloodlines, and which carry rather severe penalties for those who would harm or harass their bearers." He moved to stand beside Serena, not behind her as a protector, but next to her as an equal. "I believe the exact wording refers to consequences most dire for any who would, through malice or ignorance, bring harm to those blessed with the gift of bridge building between the realms of day and night." Theodore's face had gone pale. "You're threatening members of the Royal Council?" "I'm explaining the legal consequences of your actions," Darius replied with deadly calm. "Though I suppose whether you choose to interpret that as a threat is entirely up to you." Viviana drew herself up to her full height, clearly preparing for one final assault. "You may have the power to intimidate us now, but this isn't over. The people will never accept a queen who consorts with monsters, who allows her children to be corrupted by unnatural influences. The people," said a new voice from the chamber entrance, "are perfectly capable of speaking for themselves." Everyone turned to see Marcus entering with a delegation that made Serena's heart leap with surprise and gratitude. Baker Willem, whose bread had fed the kingdom through the hardest winter in recent memory. Healer Margaret, who had trained under the royal physicians and served the poorest districts without payment. Master James the carpenter, whose workshops had provided employment for dozens of families. Behind them came others, merchants, farmers, craftspeople, the backbone of the kingdom who had benefited from Serena's quiet policies and practical governance. "Your Grace," Willem said, addressing Serena with a respect that was clearly genuine, "we heard there were questions being raised about your fitness to rule. We thought it was time to answer those questions properly." Margaret stepped forward, her weathered hands steady as she spoke. 6 years ago, when the fever came and took half the children in the lower districts, it was Princess Serena who opened the royal medical stores and sent physicians to help us for free. Not the council, not the church, her. When the floods wiped out the spring planting, added James, it was her signature on the emergency grain distribution orders, her personal seal that released funds for rebuilding when the official channels got tangled up in bureaucracy. Willem nodded vigorously. And when the Duchess here tried to raise taxes on bread ovens last year, who was it that quietly blocked the measure and made sure families could still afford to eat? One by one, they shared stories of Serena's reign that painted a picture of quiet competence and genuine care for her people. Small acts of governance that had never made grand announcements, but had touched lives throughout the kingdom. As for her daughters, Margaret said, looking directly at Viviana with eyes that had seen too much suffering to be intimidated by noble posturing, any woman who can raise 5 children to be as kind and intelligent as these girls has proven herself beyond question. Gender doesn't make someone less valuable, and anyone who thinks it does isn't fit to judge a dog, let alone a queen. The chamber erupted in murmurs of agreement from the common delegation, while Viviana and her council members found themselves suddenly outnumbered and outflanked by the very people they claimed to represent. "This is highly irregular," Theodore protested weakly. "So is attempting to undermine a lawful ruler based on personal ambition disguised as religious concern," Darius observed dryly. Serena felt something shift inside her as she looked around the chamber filled with people who had come to defend her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. For 6 years, she had carried the weight of feeling like a failure, of believing that her inability to produce male heirs had somehow lessened her worth. But standing here, surrounded by her daughter's light and the loyalty of people who had seen her true character, she finally understood what Darius had been trying to tell her. She had never been a failure. She had been exactly what her kingdom needed. "Duchess Viviana," she said, her voice carrying the full authority of her position, You and your companions have traveled a long way to voice your concerns, and I appreciate your dedication to the kingdom's welfare. However, I believe this conversation has reached its natural conclusion. You cannot simply dismiss us, Viviana said, though her protest lacked its earlier venom. Actually, I can, Serena replied calmly. And I am. You are welcome to return to the capital and report to the full council that I am in good health, that my daughters are thriving, and that the kingdom's alliance with the Night Court has been renewed under the ancient treaties. I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear about the awakening of Dawn Guardian gifts in the royal bloodline. She paused, letting that implication sink in. I'm also sure they'll want to schedule a formal ceremony to celebrate this remarkable development, once they've had time to consult the historical records and understand what it means for our realm's future. The defeat in Viviana's eyes was complete. She had come expecting to find a broken woman she could manipulate or remove, and instead had discovered a queen who had finally remembered her own worth. This isn't over, she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. No, Serena agreed. It's not. It's just beginning. As the delegation from the capital made their awkward departure, escorted out by Marcus with perfectly polite efficiency, Serena found herself alone with Darius and her daughters in the chamber that still glowed with residual light from their awakened gifts. Mama, Aurelia said softly, tugging at her skirts, are we really special? Serena knelt down to gather her youngest into her arms, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair while her heart overflowed with love and pride. You have always been special, she said firmly, all of you. The light just helped everyone else see what I've known since the day each of you was born. What happens now? Evelyn asked, her practical mind already moving ahead to the implications of everything that had just occurred. Serena looked up at Darius, who had been watching the family reunion with an expression of such tenderness that it made her breath catch. In his silver eyes, she saw not just admiration or desire, but something deeper. The recognition of someone who understood what it meant to carry responsibility for others, who knew the weight of protecting those you loved. Now, she said, standing slowly while keeping Aurelia in her arms, we learn what it means to be Dawn Guardians. We explore the gifts that have awakened in our bloodline, and we build the bridges between our worlds that our ancestors always intended us to build. She paused, meeting Darius's gaze directly. If that's truly what you want from this alliance. What I want, Darius said, moving closer until he stood just within arm's reach, is what I have wanted since the moment I saw you standing in that harvest hall, refusing to let their cruelty break you. I want a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. I want your daughters to grow up knowing they are valued for exactly who they are. And I want, he hesitated, vulnerability flickering across his features for just a moment. I want someone to share the sunrises with, even if I can only experience them through your eyes. The admission was so honest, so filled with centuries of loneliness finally finding hope, that Serena felt her last defenses crumble completely. The sunrises, she said softly, and the sunsets. The storms and the calm days, all of it. When he kissed her, it was gentle and careful and full of promise. Her daughters giggled and made the kinds of comments children make when their parents show affection. But there was joy in their voices rather than upset. They had seen their mother alone for too long, had carried the weight of being her only sources of happiness, and the relief of knowing she had found someone who could share that burden was written clearly on their young faces. Does this mean we get to live in the castle? Helena asked hopefully. Because I really want to learn more about those night garden plants. And I want to see the library, Isabella added. Marcus said there are books in languages from before the kingdom was founded. Can I paint the murals? Celeste wanted to know. I have so many ideas for new pictures now that I know what the light looks like. And the music room, Aurelia said dreamily. I want to learn all the songs the castle knows. Evelyn, practical as always, had different concerns. What about our duties to the kingdom? Our responsibilities as royal heirs? Those won't change, Serena assured her eldest daughter. If anything, they'll expand. We'll spend time here learning about our gifts and building relationships with the Night Court, but we'll also return to the capital regularly. The kingdom needs to see that we're not hiding from our responsibilities, but embracing them more fully. A royal progress, Darius suggested. Moving between the realms as the seasons change, strengthening bonds and demonstrating the benefits of cooperation between day and night peoples. And when the next harvest ceremony comes around? Evelyn asked with a slight smile. When the next harvest ceremony comes around, Serena said, pulling all her daughters close while Darius's arms settled warm and protective around her shoulders. We'll stand together as we did tonight, as a family, as Dawn Guardians, as proof that value isn't measured by gender or expectations, but by love and courage and the willingness to stand up for what's right. As if summoned by her words, the silver light that had surrounded them during the confrontation began to glow again, but softer this time, warmer, like captured moonlight that had learned to love the sun. It painted the chamber in shades of pearl and starlight, transforming the formal space into something magical. The castle approves, Darius observed with a smile that was pure happiness. I don't think I've ever seen it glow quite that way before. It's welcoming us home, Aurelia said with the certainty of childhood. The stones are singing a welcome song. And standing there in the light of her daughter's awakened gifts, surrounded by the warmth of unexpected love and the promise of adventures yet to come, Serena finally understood what the cruel voices at the harvest ceremony had gotten wrong. She hadn't failed by having 5 daughters instead of sons. She had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams by raising 5 extraordinary young women who would change the world simply by being exactly who they were meant to be. The mockery that had once cut her to the bone now seemed like nothing more than wind that had blown past without leaving so much as a scratch, because she had discovered something more powerful than the approval of small-minded nobles or the validation of ancient traditions. She had discovered her own worth, reflected back at her through the eyes of those who loved her not despite her supposed failures, but because of her magnificent successes, and in the warm silver light of the castle that sang welcome songs and the arms of a man who understood what it meant to protect something precious, Serena finally came home to herself. The harvest ceremony had marked an ending, but it had also marked a beginning. And this beginning, she knew with absolute certainty, would be far more beautiful than anything she had ever dared to dream.